Brian Leif Hansen is the animation supervisor for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Georgiana Hayns is the director of character fabrication. I'm Matt Noble of Gold Derby. Thought I'd kick things off by asking you, Brian, what was different about this film than other animated films you'd worked on in the past?
I think, I don't know. Oh, that's a really difficult question because like so much of it is exactly the same, I think. You know, but I think working with live action directors are different than working with like people who does only animation. And I think maybe that's, done that, with Wes Anderson as well. There's very different experience to working with somebody who's more in tune with what animation is. And I think if you don't know animation, like if Guillermo does know animation, but he's still a live action director more than he's an animation director. And I think if you don't really know the rules and what you're supposed to do, you just make different choices. And I think that's the biggest difference.
Georgiana, was there something unique about this film experience for you?
In a similar way, the expectations from the beginning from Guillermo were different to what I had experienced with animation directors. He wanted puppets, but the key behind the puppets was that he wanted the animators to be able to act through the puppets, and we'd never really been asked for that before. Animators are always acting through the puppets, but it was directed in a different way. And I suppose because of that, there was more expectations of the puppets. So we pushed the puppets further than we've ever pushed stop motion puppets before to get those performances.
And Brian, was there a particular challenge for you with the film? Like anything that would... Well, the film actually talks about burdens. Was there any burden that you had, or any any?
No, there wasn't. So funny enough, I've been asked that question before as well, and I go back to that. All of it is challenging on a similar sort of level. It doesn't come at you at the same time. It comes at you bits at the time, and you just like trying to figure out what's right in front of you, and then once you figure that out, you sort of let it go behind you and then you move forward. I don't think everything is difficult kind of thing, but everything can be solved when you're working together with a great team, so there's not a particular thing. I always go back to also like moving a lot of puppets around at the same time is difficult and complicated for a long time. So that is probably when Guillermo asked us to have a camp of 20 kids running around. That was like, oh, I don't think that's what stop motion really best at here. But that again, it was just time consuming. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't a difficult thing to solve. So it's just little tiny things all the time, and then if you looked at it from the beginning and went like, oh, I need to do all this, you would just run screaming away, going but because it comes in small bits, it's easier to handle.
Georgiana, like you sort of as the character, the fabrication director, you deal with the puppets and you're putting these puppets together and things like that. What was it like sort of making puppets to tell a story about someone who makes a puppet?
That was a treat, because sort of knowing that we were making Pinocchio and it was a stop motion puppet version of Pinocchio, it was a really good thing, a good feeling inside. And when we actually made the marionettes, that was interesting because we had to make stop motion animatable versions of string puppets, and of course try and animate strings. So there was a lot of trickery behind the strings. We made fully jointed armatured puppets, which then we faked the strings with elastic. So it looks like string, but they're just kind of following the armature, the metal skeleton's movement.
Is it also a challenge, Georgina, when you've got you've got puppets who are puppets and real characters who are puppets, like of making sure that they're distinct enough so that it makes sense in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's not really a challenge. You know, a lot of that comes from the character designs. And I mean, we had sort of human style puppets, we had a wooden boy, we had these marionettes that we were making, we had creatures. But what we had was an incredible team of puppet makers across 3 different continents. We kind of got the best of the best from around the world to work on it. And each character that we worked on, we problem solved it like just for its own design. So, you know, one of the interesting things with Pinocchio is we'd made a big decision at the beginning of the movie with Guillermo that we were going to do mechanical heads for this movie. And the majority of them are mechanical heads. But when we try, and just to explain, a mechanical head is where you have a skull with tiny little articulation points set into the skull with a silicone rubber skin over the top. So that's why when you're looking at the human characters, you're kind of really feeling like this flesh moving over muscles and bones, because there kind of is. But when we tried to do that with Pinocchio, it didn't read as wood. So there was an early test that was done, and it was like, oh, that's not gonna really work. So we ended up using a completely different technique to make the puppet and animate that puppet so it's believable as wood. We use a replacement technique with 3D printed faces so we could get the wood grain matching. So, you know, that just shows you in each case, we chose the best technique from all of this experience that we all had to make the character and to get the best performance.
Yeah, and I think with Pinocchio, it's the fact that he doesn't have any, his face is not moving around, and he's just this hard shape. It really feels like he's like concrete, contrast to all the other people is have silicone things, and it really takes them apart and it makes him believable as a puppet in the puppet world.
Yeah. Like we're familiar with stop motion animation, like from a range of films, but you get such different like looks from them, from like, you know, your claymation sort of type of stuff to, you know, Fantastic Mr. Fox, where there's a bit more like fabric and fur on the creatures, to this where it's like wooden little puppets and it's like, what do you think the power of stop motion animation is in telling stories?
I don't know. I like, so when people ask this question, they quite often say, oh, it's because you can feel it's real and stuff. But I actually don't think that a lay person could sort of tell the difference. I would think that most people just get a little bit confused and they think that it all must be made in computer, because, you know, how could you otherwise do it? So I don't think I think it's actually the people that do the films that are excited about them most. You know, I think it's because they are drawn to this thing where it's kind of a live action set, but everything is just shrunk in like a 6 scale of everything. So when you're walking in on the set, it's like you've got lights and cameras and set people and painters and puppet people and riggers, and everybody's there as a big group making this thing. And I think people are drawn to that. I think, you know, definitely Wes Anderson was drawn to that massively, and Guillermo he loves, you know, anything that's built, you know, any big or small, anything that's sort of created in a physical world.
So Brian, I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah. Well, you can have a different opinion.
Yeah, I have a completely different opinion. I have the opinion that Brian disagreed with, because I actually think that stop motion, we've always been told, since I've been involved in this for 30 odd years, and from the day I got involved, people were like, oh, it's a dying art form, you know, oh, computers are going to take over. But there's something just too perfect about what computers do. And you know, computer engineers, computer modelers, computer artists, they spend their whole careers trying to get what we get for free. You know, when we're making a puppet, it's so organic, and when animators are moving that puppet, it's also so like organic. There's no symmetry to it. It's all about asymmetry. It's all about imperfection, and I think that's what humans are drawn to in stop motion, and that's why I think it's never going to be a dying art form, because it's very different to computers. There's a real tactile quality. So everything that Brian said, I disagree with.
But do you think, really, honestly, George, do you think that the viewer, like a person viewing it, like
I do.
Yeah, maybe they do.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's like you're sort of both right in the sense that like people don't have that conscious thought when viewing the film, but there is that sort of authenticity or like those little imperfections that give character to the film that otherwise there wouldn't be there. So it's not like they think, oh, I love this stop motion, but they're going, but like there's just something that draws them in and gives them an enjoyment that they don't even realize.
It's like fairy tale, and you know, from childhood when you're pretending that your toys are speaking and running around and flying and stuff, it's the same sort of thing. And I think you feel, as a human, you feel like comfortable in that space. So those,
I agree with Brian right there.
This time.
There you go. Bring
I've been
people
convinced
together.
by the rest of you. I've changed my mind now.
Yeah, because there is something like when you see one of these stop motion animation films, it doesn't have the smoothness of a computer generated one, but there's something beautiful about the imperfection. And I think that's a big actually message of the story of Pinocchio, of beauty in the imperfection.
Yeah, I think we did. I think we did try not to make it too perfect. We have this. What is it, George? I can't remember now. Perfect, nearly perfect.
Oh, it's perfectly imperfect. That was the sort of the creative philosophy,
Which is what we've sort of had the philosophy, and that's how the animation is done as well. It's not like if a fabric is moving around, it doesn't really matter. The most important is that the audience are feeling the emotion of the character. So rather it's like flickering around somewhere in the background or whatever. It doesn't. That was not the important thing about when we animated this. It was emotion that was important.
You know, I do think it's interesting with there's, you know, we're always asked about why is stop motion still a thing, and at the end of the day, I think stop motion is just a great cinematic format that's been around for a long time to tell stories. So is computer animation. And what makes a good computer animation, or what makes a good stop motion animation, is a good story. And I think that's what shines through with Pinocchio. It's a great story, and you know, we've made a beautiful looking film, but it holds up because there's a great story behind it.
What is the magic to this story? Brian, you can start by answering this. What is so special about this story of Pinocchio?
I'm probably just going to repeat something that Guillermo said a lot. It's a relationship between fathers and sons, I think so, and that could have been moms and daughters, but in this case, it's fathers and sons, and it's throughout. It's like a relationship between Geppetto and Pinocchio Carlo, and it's a relationship between Podesta and Candlewick and Volpe and Spazzatura. And I think that's something you can relate to a lot. And George, help me.
It's also, and this is also something that Guillermo talks about a lot. It's a story about disobedience rather than obedience. And in the world that we're living in at the moment, that's a really important story to tell. And the other words that are always used in describing this movie is it's a movie about love, life, and loss. And it's, you know, Guillermo often, he's been asked, is this a kids movie? And he's like, you can take your kids to see it if you talk to your kids about it. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because I think it's a story for all ages, because it's a story about disobedience, but it's also a story about this small wooden boy. Now we, it's a wooden boy in our world. It's just somebody that the whole world has wanted, but when this person is, when this character is given to the world, they don't know what to do and they're scared of it. And this is a story that happens throughout life history. And I think in the times that we're living in, this is an anti-fascist movie, but told in a beautiful, loving way. So
yeah. What, Georgiana, also just like, not just to mention the story, but like, I'm someone who, when I was a kid, Mum would take me to go see the string puppets down at Sydney Rocks, and like I grew up on the Muppets and stuff like that. What do you think the power is of puppetry in telling stories?
Oh, I mean, puppetry has been an age-old storytelling art form. Before cinema ever existed, even back in the Stone Age, they were using their hands with candle, to tell stories, and that's puppetry. So puppetry is an educational tool for all ages, and it's a way to overcome fear. Fear in humans is the biggest problem, and if you can tell stories through some kind of like art form, then which make the things that you're scared of not seem as scary, then it's a wonderful thing. And I think the reason that puppets work so well is that you can turn them into anything. You can make monsters, you can make humans with puppets and act out things in front of a child or in front of an adult that maybe you don't want to act out with human beings. It just makes it easier to watch, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I think you can with animation. So whether it's like stop motion or what it is, with animation you can sort of easily transplant your own mind into these characters. Because they're sort of not whole. They're not whole humans. They're sort of like characters of human, and therefore you could fit into it. And I think some of the stuff that works really well with Pinocchio is because he's quite simple. His facial features are very simple. We move the eyes very little, so you sort of make up the rest, and therefore he becomes perfect. Like the Pinocchio that I experienced and the Pinocchio you experienced and Pinocchio that George experienced, and not particularly the same Pinocchio, because he's so sort of blank. Like I think any animated character is such a blank sheet, you could just fill all your own emotion into it. I think maybe that's why the animation in general is so successful. I
like something else the film talks about is the little things, the forgotten things, the lost things. Brian, and I'll get Georgina to answer this too, but like, is there a little thing or choice or aspect to this film that made a big difference?
That's very quiet. George, you go first, and I've been thinking about it.
Oh, well, thanks. That is a tough question.
Let me think. Like, let me just mutter it together, then, George.
I mean, the whole of our movie is made with small things.
Yeah,
and I do think that a lot of that is about the story. The story really. It's the small things in life that the story is talking about, which are really actually important, huge things, things that you pass by. But actually in the making of it,
the environment we made it in was special. I think we did not do like 50-hour plus weeks much at all. People were paid decent, which is quite often in film business is not. Like, there's a lot of people who's not paid anything. So I think maybe if that's the one thing that was special about this one is like, I think so.
Yeah, I mean,
I love not working 50 plus hours. That's quite good. and I think everybody gives a little bit more, like, better work when they're not completely exhausted by yesterday's 10-hour, 11-hour, whatever, and then they come in and a little bit fresher in their minds.
And I think actually, on top, adding to what Brian's talking about, one of the really important things about this movie is the kindness that was shown to everybody. We worked as a team, and often these projects are big. There's a lot of people involved, and when things start to go wrong, there is a tendency to want to point fingers and deflect blame. And whenever anything went wrong, we all came together, the creatives, the production, and we problem solved the problems together, and we found a solution, and we sort of moved through it. So it's funny because the smallest thing is communication, and yet it's the biggest thing, and it's the most important thing to make one of these films. So I would say that's my small thing.
Yeah, and I think also Guillermo is really very appreciative of everybody working on the film. He didn't need to come around to everybody and take photos with them and stuff, but he did. So it was just there's a lot of give, I think, in this film.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great space to end. Wish both of you the best of luck with the upcoming award nominations and things for Pinocchio, where your little sets will be competing against big productions in the best visual effects category that you're
that was a bit
yeah, that's quite exciting.
I texted to everybody. Look out, Avatar. Coming for you.
But it's very interesting that we have been nominated for that, because what's interesting is the word visual effect is exactly what we do every day, and yet visual effect has been pigeonholed as something that is only done with computers. So this is us out there going, no, it can be practical visual effects still, because look what we've just made.
So all the best of luck with all those categories and nomination announcements and stuff like that, as well as just for the film in general. I know Pinocchio's looking very good in the Gold Derby odds for best animated film at the Oscars at the moment, so we'll see how that pans out. And people can go to goldderby.com to check out the odds and join the discussions about awards. And guys, thank you just so much for your time today. It's really appreciated.
Pleasure. Thank you.